I moved into my new apartment at the beginning of the semester, thrilled to finally have a place of my own. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small one-bedroom unit in an old building near campus. The rent was cheap, the neighbors seemed quiet, and aside from a few creaky floorboards, it felt perfect. The first few nights, everything was normal. I was still getting used to the space, figuring out where I wanted my furniture, dealing with the occasional weird noise from the pipes. Just the usual things that come with living alone. But then little things started happening. Things I could explain, at first. I'd come home from class, and notice the fridge door wasn't closed all the way. I'd convince myself I must have left it like that. A few times, I found lights on in rooms I swore I had turned off before leaving. Maybe I was just stressed, distracted, not paying attention. The weirdest part was the food. A couple of times, I went to grab something from the fridge only to realize it was missing. A yogurt, a slice of pizza, even a can of soda. It was frustrating, but I assumed I must have eaten them and forgotten. It was the only thing that made sense. Then there were the noises. My apartment had old wooden floors, and they creaked every time I walked on them. But at night, when everything was silent, I'd hear faint sounds shuffling, like someone moving carefully across the floor. A couple of times, I sat up in bed, holding my breath, listening. But nothing happened. Just the occasional creak, maybe the wind against the window. I started sleeping with a fan on, drowning out the noises with white noise. It made me feel better, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was just off. One night, I woke up to the sound of a cabinet door clicking shut. My heart pounded as I lay in bed, frozen. I told myself it was nothing, the wood contracting, or maybe I hadn't closed it properly. I didn't check. I didn't want to. But the next morning, the cabinet was open. I stood there, staring at it, trying to come up with a reasonable explanation. Maybe I had opened it the night before and forgot to close it all the way. That had to be it. I had to stop letting my imagination get to me. A week later, I had a friend over for a movie night. She used the bathroom and came out frowning. "Hey," she said, "why do you have your toothbrush in the sink?" I blinked. "I don't," I said, getting up to check. Sure enough, my toothbrush was lying in the sink, damp. My stomach dropped. I hadn't used it yet that day. I quickly put it back in its holder, laughing it off, making up some excuse about knocking it over earlier. But inside I felt sick. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time. It made me feel a little better, but the sense of unease never left. I kept telling myself there was nothing to worry about, but my body wasn't buying it. My skin prickled when I walked into dark rooms. I started double-checking locks. I even put a small chair in front of my closet door, for no real reason other than it made me feel safer. I was being paranoid, right? Then one evening, I went to get a box from the closet. I had been meaning to unpack it for weeks, but I kept putting it off. As I pulled it off the shelf, something caught my eye. There was a small hole in the wall, about the size of a dime. It wasn't a nail hole. It was too perfect, too deliberate. I frowned, stepping closer, running my finger around the edge. It looked almost intentional. I hesitated, then pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. Slowly, I angled it toward the hole and peered inside. At first, I saw nothing. Just darkness. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I realized there was something there. No, someone. A pale reflection, shifting slightly. My breath caught in my throat as the realization hit me. An eye. There was an eye staring back at me. For a second, I couldn't move. I was too shocked, too horrified to react. The eye didn't blink, didn't flinch, just stared. My pulse pounded in my ears, and my hands went ice cold. Then, as if finally processing what I was seeing, I yanked my head back and stumbled away from the closet, my phone slipping from my fingers. The light bounced against the floor, casting jagged shadows on the walls. My whole body was shaking. Someone was in there. Someone had been watching me. I backed up until I hit the wall, gasping for air. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but I was frozen. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Was it a prank? Was this some kind of sick joke? No, this was real. The eye had moved. It had looked at me. Someone was inside my walls. The thought made my stomach turn. How long had they been there? Had they been watching me this whole time? After what felt like forever, I forced myself to move. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and turned the flashlight back on, pointing it toward the hole. The eye was gone. Just darkness now, an empty void where someone had been moments ago. My legs felt weak, but I had to do something. I had to get out. I bolted for the front door, fumbling with the lock, practically ripping it open as I stumbled into the hallway. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. I didn't know where to go, but I couldn't stay there. I ran down the stairs, heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I burst out onto the street, gulping in the cold night air. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. There was no way anyone should have been in my walls. But they were. I had seen them, and I had no idea if they were still there. I called the police from the sidewalk, my voice barely working. I told them someone was inside my walls, that I had seen them watching me. They didn't seem to understand at first, but the panic in my voice must have convinced them. They told me to stay put, that an officer was on the way. I kept glancing up at my apartment window, half expecting to see a face staring down at me. But there was nothing, just darkness. When the police arrived, I led them upstairs, feeling sick with every step. My door was still open, swinging slightly from when I had rushed out. The officers moved in ahead of me, shining their flashlights inside. "Stay here," one of them said before disappearing into my apartment. I waited in the hallway, my arms wrapped around myself, trying not to shake. I could hear them moving around, opening doors, checking the closet. A few minutes later, one of the officers came back out, looking confused. "Miss, there's no one here," he said. I stared at him, my mouth dry. "Check the wall," I whispered. "There's a hole in the closet." Someone was looking through it. They exchanged glances before going back in. I pressed myself against the hallway wall, listening to them moving things, tapping on the walls. And then I heard it. A dull, hollow sound. One of the officers knocked again. "This wall isn't solid," he muttered. I felt a chill run through me. They exchanged looks, then one of them called for backup. "We're gonna need maintenance to open this up," he said. I swallowed hard, my skin crawling. Because now I knew for sure. There was a space behind that wall. And someone had been living in it. I stood in the hallway, arms crossed tightly over my chest, watching as more officers arrived. One of them had gone to get the building manager, who showed up looking half asleep and annoyed, until he heard what was happening. His face paled when they told him there might be a hidden space behind my closet wall. "That's not possible," he muttered, shaking his head. "This building's old, sure, but there aren't any crawl spaces or anything like that." One of the officers gestured toward my apartment. "Then you won't mind if we open it up?" he asked. The manager hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck, before finally nodding. "Go ahead," he said. "But if this is some kind of mistake," he trailed off, but I wasn't paying attention to him anymore. My eyes were locked on the closet, heart pounding as one of the officers took out a crowbar and wedged it against the wall. The sound of wood splitting made my skin crawl. The officer pried at the drywall, pulling back a section of it, and a dark, empty space slowly came into view. I sucked in a breath. It was real. There was a hollowed-out gap between my apartment and the unit next door, narrow, but big enough for someone to squeeze through. The air that seeped out smelled stale, like dust and something else. Something rotten. One of the officers shone a flashlight inside, and my stomach twisted. There was a small sleeping bag crumpled in the corner, along with food wrappers, an empty water bottle, and what looked like a notebook. My blood ran cold. Someone had been living in there. The officer pulled back more of the wall, widening the hole enough to step through. The building manager swore under his breath, his face turning an unhealthy shade of white. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. I stayed frozen as they searched the space, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. It wasn't big, maybe 2 feet wide, running the length of my apartment. The officers checked every inch of it, but the person, whoever they were, was gone. One of them picked up the notebook and flipped through the pages. His face darkened as he read. I wanted to ask what it said, but my throat felt tight. I had no idea if I even wanted to know. Then, just as I thought I couldn't take any more, one of the officers turned to me, his expression grim. "You need to come see this," he said. My legs felt like lead as I forced myself forward. He held out the notebook, open to a page covered in messy, frantic handwriting. At first, I couldn't make sense of it, but then I saw my name. My name. Over and over again. My hands started to shake. There were notes, detailed descriptions of my routine. When I left for class. When I came home. When I showered. When I slept. The officer flipped to another page, and my stomach lurched. A rough sketch of my bedroom. My bed. And next to it, scrawled in uneven letters, "I like when she sleeps." She looked so peaceful. I don't remember much after that. Everything felt hazy, like I was watching it happen to someone else. The officers called for a full search of the building, knocking on doors, questioning neighbors. No one had seen anything. The maintenance guy swore he had no idea the space even existed. And the person who had been living in my walls? Gone. Just gone. No sign of forced entry. No clear way they had escaped. It was like they had just vanished into thin air. I spent the rest of the night at a friend's place. I couldn't go back there, not after what I had seen. The thought of sleeping in that apartment, knowing someone had been there, watching me for who knows how long, made my skin crawl. My friend stayed up with me, but I barely spoke. I just sat there, gripping my phone, replaying everything over and over in my head. The noises, the missing food, the toothbrush in the sink. It had all been real, and I had ignored it. The next day, the landlord let me break my lease without a fight. I think he was scared of bad publicity, or maybe he just wanted me gone before I told more people about what had happened. Either way, I packed up my things and left by that evening. I didn't take much, just threw everything into bags and got the hell out of there. I didn't even look at the closet before I left. I never wanted to see that hole in the wall again. The police never found the person. They said they would keep investigating, but I could tell they didn't expect to find much. The best theory they had was that whoever it was had been using an old maintenance passage that had been sealed off years ago. Except, clearly, it hadn't been sealed off completely. They figured he must have slipped out the night I discovered him, disappearing into the building's walls like a ghost. For weeks, I felt like I was being watched. Even after I moved, I couldn't shake the feeling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that notebook. Those words. I like when she sleeps. I barely slept after that. Every creak of the floor, every shift of the shadows, sent me into a panic. I started keeping my closet door shut, even though I knew I was safe now. Or at least, I thought I was. It's been months, and I still don't have answers. I don't think I ever will. All I know is that someone had been living in my walls, watching me, tracking my every move. And worst of all, I have no idea how long they were there before I finally noticed.